All right, welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, welcome in.
Today we are going to be diving into a pretty interesting topic.
Oh, yeah, this will be good.
What might the next year hold for Coinbase, global stock, Coin?
Coinbase, yeah.
Yeah, Coin. We got sent an article from the Motley Fool published yesterday, April 9th, 2025.
Oh, wow. So hot off the press.
Super recent. For those of you who haven't heard of the Motley Fool.
Which I'm sure is not many.
Yeah, not many in our audience, but just in case. They're a really long-standing financial services company.
Yeah, weird.
And their goal is really to help, empower individual investors.
To make better decisions.
To make smarter decisions. Yeah, and they really offer everything from premium stock recommendations to free analysis over on Fool.com.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on Fool.com.
Oh, me too.
It's a great resource.
And then they also have their own podcasts.
Oh, yeah, I've listened to those too.
Yeah, their podcasts are awesome.
Yeah.
And even a charitable foundation.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the Motley Fool Foundation. That's awesome. So, pretty cool organization all around. And you sent this article in hoping to get a little bit more clarity on what factors
could push the stock, up or down.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are the things that are going to move Coinbase stock one way or the other?
Yeah.
And so our goal in this deep dive is to really extract the most important parts of the Motley Fool's analysis.
Both the good and the bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're going to look at, the potential upsides and the risks that are highlighted and figure out, where could this stock be headed.
Totally. Sounds good.
All right, so let's dive into it.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the incredible run that Coinbase had leading up to the end of 2024.
Okay.
The article points out that the stock price closed at $343.62 on December 6th, 2024.
Wow.
Which is a 155% gain over the previous year.
That's huge.
Which is incredible. Yeah, 155% gain in 1 year. That's unheard of almost.
Yeah, especially in the stock market.
Yeah, and especially after the year that crypto had and the few years leading up to that.
Especially in the stock market recently, right?
Right.
Things haven't been so hot.
Yeah, so what was the catalyst behind this jump?
Well, what's interesting is the article connects that surge to President Trump's electoral victory. So the market seems to have interpreted his win as a potentially good thing for the crypto space.
As being a good thing.
Yeah, as being a good thing for crypto, leading to, more enthusiasm and more investment in platforms like Coinbase.
Gotcha. So Trump equals good for crypto.
That seems to be the market sentiment at the time, at least.
Gotcha. And then also the article points out that Coinbase's performance is heavily reliant on a vibrant crypto market.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So high trading volumes, which are often spurred by rising crypto prices,
lead to higher revenue for them.
Of course, because they're taking a cut.
Exactly. They're making money on every trade.
Yeah.
So the more trades, the better for them.
Yeah. More trades, higher prices, more excitement. All that equals more money for Coinbase.
Makes total sense.
Makes total sense. And, conversely, a cooling market with less trading can lead to challenges for them.
Of course, if people aren't trading, then they're not making money.
They're not making money.
Yeah.
And, the article reminds us of the massive 514% revenue explosion in 2021.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That was a crazy year to be following crypto, let alone be invested in it.
Yeah, that was nuts.
What do you think the key factors were that drove that earlier boom?
Well, back then, the environment was pretty different.
Yeah.
You had super low interest rates.
Yeah, rates were basically at zero.
Basically zero, which means that money was basically free to borrow.
Yeah, which means people can speculate more.
People can speculate more. And then on top of that, we had the government stimulus.
Yeah, pumping money into the economy.
Pumping money into the economy and a lot of hype around crypto.
Social media hype.
Yeah, social media hype. A ton of YouTubers talking about it.
Oh, yeah. Every influencer was talking about it.
Everybody was talking about it.
So that created the perfect storm for, increased trading activity.
Yeah, the perfect storm.
But that didn't last.
You're telling me?
And you're telling me I wish we were still in that bull market.
We all do.
But no, it didn't last. The article says that revenue plummeted 59% in 2022.
Oof, that's a big drop.
That's a huge drop.
Yeah.
And then followed by another 3% decline in 2023.
So 2 years of just pain.
2 years of just straight down. And that was, the crypto winter.
Yeah, that was a rough couple of years.
What were the things that drove that downturn?
Well, the article says that it was mainly rising interest rates.
It makes sense.
So as rates went up, investors got more scared. and started moving their money into less risky assets.
Yeah, got to protect that capital.
Yeah, you got to protect the capital. And this cooling effect on the market naturally impacted platforms like Coinbase.
Yeah, of course.
Because less speculation, less trading.
And speculation, yeah.
But then things changed again in 2024.
Oh, did they ever change?
Yeah.
Things got interesting again.
Yeah, the narrative totally flipped in 2024.
Yeah, in a good way.
In a good way.
The article highlights some really positive developments in 2024 that seem to have reignited the crypto market.
Yeah.
So the Fed started cutting benchmark interest rates.
Did they cut them 3 times?
3 times.
3 times, to be exact.
And then Bitcoin had a huge rally, like almost 120%.
Yeah, it was almost back to its all-time high.
What fueled that resurgence?
Well, there were 2 main things.
Okay.
One was the SEC finally approved spot Bitcoin ETFs.
Which is huge.
Yeah, it was a really big deal because it made it a lot easier for institutional investors to get into Bitcoin.
Yeah, everyone was waiting for that.
Yeah, everyone was waiting for that. And then the other thing was the Bitcoin halving.
Oh, yeah, the halvening.
Yeah, the halvening, it reduces the rate at which new Bitcoins are created.
Which basically reduces supply.
Yeah, supply and demand, right?
Supply and demand, right? If you reduce the supply and the demand stays the same.
Price goes up.
Price goes up.
Economics 101.
And all of that new enthusiasm around Bitcoin had a really positive impact on Coinbase's results in 2024.
For sure, their revenue more than doubled to $6.6 billion.
Wow.
And their adjusted EBITDA more than tripled to $3.3 billion.
So not only were they making more money, they were making more profit.
Exactly. Their margins were expanding as well.
That's huge. And can we dig into some of the quarterly numbers?
Yeah, for sure.
To see how that played out?
So looking at the trading volume, it climbed from $154 billion in Q4 2023 to a high of $439 billion in Q4 2024.
Wow.
So it went up and up and up.
Wow. And of course, total revenue followed a pretty similar pattern.
Yeah, going from $954 million in Q4 2023 to $2.2 billion in Q4 2024.
So that really underscores that connection between market activity and Coinbase's revenue.
100%, they're joined at the hip.
Yeah, when crypto does well, Coinbase does well.
Exactly.
And the article says that this, strong performance and the perception of, a crypto-friendly political climate
led to Coinbase's stock reaching a 3-year peak at the end of 2024.
Yeah, but that's not the end of the story, is it?
No, not even close.
So then 2025 hits.
Yeah.
And the article talks about a pretty serious about face.
Yeah.
After hitting that 343 and 62 cent high, the stock fell down to around $160 by the time the article was published.
Ouch.
Which is a, big correction.
Yeah, huge correction.
What caused this decline?
Well, the main thing that the article points to is fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of another crypto winter.
Oh, no, another crypto winter.
But this time it wasn't about interest rates.
Oh, so what was it about?
This time it was about President Trump's tariffs on trading partners.
Oh, those tariffs.
Yeah.
So the thinking was that these tariffs were going to cause a lot of uncertainty in the global economy.
Yeah, that was the main concern.
Making investors,
Right.
Less willing to take risks.
Yeah, pull their money out of risky assets.
Yeah, and put it into safer things.
Like gold or bonds.
Like gold, yeah. Things that, traditionally hold their value during times of uncertainty.
Exactly.
And then, crypto being a very speculative asset.
It's definitely seen as a risky asset.
Was one of the first things to go.
Yeah, so people were selling their crypto to get into those safer assets.
Interesting.
The article even refers to these tariffs as Liberation Day tariffs.
Oh, wow. Liberation Day tariffs?
Yeah, that's what Trump is calling them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the concern is that, these tariffs could start a trade war, and then that could lead to a recession.
Yeah, that was definitely a possibility.
Which would, of course, be bad for the economy.
Bad for pretty much every asset class.
Yeah, including crypto.
Especially crypto, yeah.
And we're seeing that, impact reflected in crypto prices, right?
Yeah, Bitcoin, which is, the biggest cryptocurrency.
Yeah, the OG.
Yeah, the OG is down about 15%.
Since the start of 2025.
Since the start of 2025, yeah.
Right.
Which is a lot for Bitcoin.
That's a pretty big move for Bitcoin, yeah.
But then Ethereum has fallen even more.
Oh, wow. How much more?
It's down over 50%.
Over 50%.
Yeah.
Ouch. So Ethereum got hit way harder.
Way harder, yeah. And the article even suggests that it could go down even more.
If the tariffs lead to a recession.
Yeah, if things get really bad.
Yeah.
Crypto could really suffer.
Yeah. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit here.
Okay.
And let's talk about what Wall Street analysts are saying about Coinbase's financial performance, for the rest of 2025 and into 2026.
Okay.
So given all this volatility, what are they expecting?
Well, they're still projecting growth for Coinbase in 2025.
Okay.
But it's a lot slower than what we saw in 2024.
Right.
So they're anticipating a 24% increase in revenue and an 18% rise in adjusted EBITDA.
Which are still good numbers.
They're good numbers, but way lower than what we saw in 2024.
Right, but then for 2026, they're way more subdued.
Yeah, only 3% revenue growth and 6% EBITDA growth.
Which basically means flat.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so that tells you that there's not a lot of confidence in a quick recovery for the crypto market.
Yeah, it seems like they're expecting things to be pretty rough for a while. Gotcha. All right, so even with those, kind of muted projections, the article talks about Coinbase's current valuation.
Yeah.
So what's the main point they're making there?
Well, they're pointing out that Coinbase might actually be a bargain right now.
Okay.
Because with an enterprise value of $31.9 billion, it's trading at about 4 times this year's projected revenue and 8 times its expected adjusted EBITDA.
Okay, so help me understand what that means.
So basically they're saying that the price you pay for the company is relatively low compared to how much money they're making.
Okay, so like low price to earnings ratio.
Yeah, similar concept.
Interesting.
And based on these estimates, and assuming the valuation stays the same, the article suggests the stock price could go up by about 6% to around $167.
So they're thinking that the stock might be bottoming out.
Yeah, that's their take.
Interesting. But they also include a caveat about these analyst estimates, right?
Yeah, they say you got to take Wall Street projections with a grain of salt.
Yeah, of course.
Because the crypto market is so unpredictable.
Super unpredictable. And if these tariffs and economic problems keep scaring investors away from crypto, Coinbase could easily miss those expectations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's all about investor sentiment.
Yeah, and right now the sentiment is pretty negative.
Yeah. So that brings us to the author's own outlook.
Okay.
Which seems to be even more cautious than the analyst consensus.
Yeah, the author's not very bullish.
What's their Kate?
They think that Coinbase's stock is basically going to stay flat for the next year.
So not go up or down.
Yeah, pretty much. And that it will probably underperform the market as a whole.
Okay. And what's the logic behind that?
Well, even if the trade war doesn't get worse,
yeah,
it can take a long time for investor confidence in crypto to fully recover.
Okay. It makes sense.
So the author is basically saying that even if the economy improves, sentiment towards crypto might lag behind.
Yeah. It could take a while for people to, get excited about crypto again.
Exactly.
Especially after, getting burned a couple times.
Yeah, nobody likes losing money.
Especially not twice.
Okay.
All right, so the article gives us a snapshot of where Coinbase and the major cryptos were trading as of yesterday.
As of April 9th, 2025.
April 9th, 2025. So can you break those numbers down for us?
Okay, so Coinbase closed at $177.12.
Okay.
Down 16.93%, or $25.65.
So a big drop.
Yeah.
Pretty big drop.
And then Bitcoin.
81,729, down 5.24%.
Okay, so a decent drop.
Yeah, but not as bad as Coinbase.
And then Ethereum.
Ethereum closed at $1,599.92.
Wow.
Down 7.76%, or $115.23.
So a pretty big drop for Ethereum.
Yeah, Ethereum is definitely taking a hit.
It's had a rough couple of months.
Yeah, rough couple of months.
And it's worth noting that the Motley Fool discloses that they hold positions in Bitcoin, Coinbase, and Ethereum.
They're not shy about that.
They're very transparent about that, but the author of this particular article doesn't own any of those.
Yeah, so they're just giving their unbiased opinion.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah, I like that.
Always good to have that neutral third party.
Definitely.
All right, so let's wrap this up.
What are the biggest takeaways from the Motley Fool's analysis?
Well, I think the main thing is that the market sentiment has completely shifted.
Yeah.
Coinbase had amazing growth in 2024 when everyone was excited about crypto.
Yeah.
But now in 2025, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty.
Because of those tariffs.
Yeah, because of the tariffs.
Yeah.
And the potential for a trade war and recession.
And that's making investors nervous.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be holding risky assets when the economy is looking shaky.
Makes sense. And we see that reflected in the, different outlooks from the analysts versus the author.
Yeah, the analysts are still somewhat optimistic, but the author is way more cautious.
Yeah.
So I guess it really depends on how you view the overall economy.
Yeah.
If you think things are going to get better, then maybe Coinbase is a good buy.
Yeah, but if you think things are going to get worse,
then you probably want to stay away.
Yeah, and I think the main point here is that crypto is still super volatile.
Yeah, it's still the Wild West out there.
Yeah, it's impossible to predict what's going to happen.
Especially with all this macroeconomic uncertainty.
Yeah, who knows what Trump is going to do next?
Who knows, yeah.
He could wake up tomorrow and decide to lift all the tariffs, or he could double down.
Yeah, or he could start a war with Canada.
Or he could start a war with Canada. Who knows?
Who knows?
So, yeah, I think that's a really good reminder for investors.
Be careful out there.
Yeah, to be careful, to do their research, and to not get caught up in the hype.
Yeah, FOMO can be dangerous.
FOMO can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
So, what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing is that global events can have a huge impact on your investments.
Yeah, even if those investments seem unrelated.
Exactly. So, the trade war with China might seem far removed from your Coinbase stock.
Yeah.
But it can actually have a big impact.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It shows how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, the global economy is a complex system.
It is, and we're all part of it.
Whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not. All right, so that's it for our deep dive into Coinbase.
Thanks for diving with us.
Thanks for diving with us. Make sure to check out Fool.com.
Yeah, they've got tons of great information over there.
Tons of great information, for free.
Yeah.
And we will see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.